Well, the continuing story of the books of the Bible, this survey of the Bible. Today we're going to cover 12 books. Don't panic. I'll do it pretty quick. These are the 12 books of the Old Testament called the books of history. They cover a period beginning with the Israelites entering and conquering the Promised Land, and they conclude with, they didn't complete that like God wanted, but anyway, it concludes with the return of the nation of Judah from captivity in Babylon. The time period of these 12 books includes the building of God's temple in Jerusalem, political changes from a priest-led society to a kingdom. You know, we started with patriarchs and then Moses, a.k.a. the priest, if you will, with Aaron doing part of that. But a theocratic society. And now they gradually become, through the judges in 1 Samuel, partway through 1 Samuel, they become a kingdom with a king. And then they're divided into two kingdoms after Solomon dies. And yeah, so basically it goes from the end of Moses' life until the end of the Old Testament. So as was shown when the Israelites left Egypt, they rebelled against God repeatedly, and resulting in their wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. Well, the books of history show repeatedly how the Israelites turned their backs on God. And yet God would welcome them back when they repented. If there's one dominant theme for these 12 books, frankly the whole Bible, is that God always welcomes his people when they repent. If there's one dominant theme in these 12 books, it's the issue of leadership. They went from being led by the father of the family to led by one leader chosen by God, to the judges and the prophet Samuel, to being led by kings. And we can see the importance of God's plan and the failure of man's plans, the shortcomings of having a human king full of faults versus God as the perfect king. So information about the 12 books. How much do I want to read here? I mean, there's, like I said in the last lesson, I said 250 chapters in these 12 books. It's 249. I'm not perfect. These books were originally written from 1400 BC to 470 BC. The 400 is a little iffy. 1400 is a little iffy, but the 470 is pretty close. So major themes, authors, Joshua wrote the book of the conquest of Canaan. Then Judges, Ruth, 1 Samuel, they were all written by Samuel, tell how Israel was saved by Judges, and then Ruth's biography. And then King Saul's and David, eventually 1 Samuel, it starts with Samuel and then King Saul. And then David comes in as King Saul mostly tries to kill him after first meeting him. 2 Samuel, it's thought that Ezra wrote that. There's some debate that's fine. But that 2 Samuel is all about King David. And I mean, as Samuel had died before we get this book, so that's why some things Ezra. First Kings, Solomon and the divided kingdom, and then Second Kings is the kings of Judah. It's believed Jeremiah wrote those. Not everyone agrees. Then First and Second Chronicles. It's kind of certain that Ezra wrote these. They First Chronicles goes from Adam and does brief history of the world all the way up to King Solomon. More detail on the later part. Second Chronicles is all about Solomon and other kings. Then the book of Ezra. I'll come back to that. I got another thought, but I'll come back to it. Ezra wrote about the restoration of the temple, and Nehemiah wrote about the restoration of Jerusalem's wall. Again, I'll tell you more about that in a bit. Esther is an interesting book. It appears that Mordecai wrote that. We aren't certain of that. But speaking of Esther, there are only two women that have a book of the Bible named after them, Ruth and Esther. They're both in these 12 books. Esther is the only book of the Bible that does not mention God. Sort of. It's a trivia question. What book of the Bible doesn't mention God? Esther. Well, but she did pray. And speaking of trivia questions, my wife came up with one many years ago. She asked me, did you know there are 5 women listed in Jesus' genealogy? And I said, no. And she said, did you know that 4 of them were Gentiles? No. Of course, the 5th one being Mary, who was a Jew, the mother of Jesus. But a little research showed me that she was right. Tamar was the first one, Genesis 38. Her father-in-law impregnated her. Go read the story. It's quite something. And the next one is Rahab, but she's in the genealogy of Jesus. The next one is Rahab, the prostitute, who hid the 2 spies that were checking out at Jericho. She's in the genealogy of Jesus. Tamar was a Jebusite and Rahab was Canaanite. The next one's Ruth. She was a Moabite. Her father-in-law and his wife went from Israel to Moab because of a famine. He died there, and then both of his sons died there. So Ruth's mother-in-law decided to go back to Israel. The other sister-in-law, Ruth's sister-in-law, left, stayed behind, but Ruth refused, even though Naomi wanted her to stay behind and get married. Anyway, Ruth was a Moabite. And then the 4th one was Bathsheba. Her husband was a Hittite. It seems to indicate she was a Gileadite. Could have been a Hittite, but I think she was a Gileadite. Anyway, King David had an affair with her, got her pregnant, and she was the mother of Solomon. So again, 4 Gentile women in Jesus' genealogy. There's a big lesson in there if you stop to think about it. And they weren't all the cleanest of people, were they? Joshua, the book of Joshua, tells the story of the conquering of the Promised Land. During this period, Joshua led in a similar manner to Moses. Israel is faithful to God for the most part. They fought together and they were very successful in conquering the land with a minimum number of battles. Although, as I already mentioned, they did not totally clear the Promised Land like they were supposed to. The end of this book states, the land had rest from war. The book of Judges is a record of how the Israelites were saved by judges. So as they moved from a theocratic society into a nation, a judge was both a military leader and a legal authority, and a spiritual leader, I guess. There were many judges, often one per tribe. The book of Judges records story about the judges, but not about all of them, only about some. In the book of Judges, the Israelites are less than unified. Each tribe pretty much stood on their own. There were continual problems with the people worshiping Baal, a Canaanite god. They would end up in trouble and plead with God, and he would send a judge to rescue them. Eventually, they would turn away from God and repeat the cycle. The end of this book states that not a good thing. It states that each person did what was right in their own eyes. So the timeline of the Judges, the book of Judges tells the story of Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah with Barak, Gideon, Abimelech, Tola, Jair, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, and Samson. What's interesting in the tribes they were from, we've got Judah, Benjamin, and then one we don't know. Then Deborah was from Ephraim, and Barak was from Naphtali. They're kind of intertwined in their story. And then a couple from Manasseh, then Issachar, and then two that are from Gilead, Manasseh. Go read that and see what it means. It means Gilead of Manasseh. There's the answer. Then Ibzan, we're not sure if he's from Judah or Zebulun. That one I can't figure out. Elon was from Zebulun. Abdon was from Ephraim, and Samson was from Dan. Not important. One note: Abimelech, he was evil, not good, not a good judge. The longest judge who served the longest time was Ehud, served 80 years. Abimelech only served 3 years. The next shortest were Jephthah with 6 and Ibzan with 7 years. Abdon with 8. All the rest were 10 or more. Many of them 20 or up, 2 of them 40. The book of Ruth is a partial biography of King David's great-grandmother. The book of Ruth occurs during the time of the Judges. It demonstrates the importance of both family and land. Elimelech, like I said, he went to Moab. And when Naomi goes back to Israel, Ruth marries an Israelite named Boaz, and it was because of land, so that Elimelech's land would remain in the family, and Boaz was a near relative, so he would be acceptable by Jewish law. Anyway, a side note from the book of Ruth makes me chuckle. There's a verse that's quoted at many weddings these days, but this verse had nothing to do with a wedding or a man and a woman getting married or anything like that. It was what Ruth told her mother-in-law when they were still in Moab. Naomi was heading back to Israel. Ruth says, "Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God." It wasn't a wedding. It was a woman to her mother-in-law. All right, now we come to a group of 4 books. If we get into details, these are renamed in different manners. Don't worry about it unless you become a real geek. But these 4 books all tell parts of the stories of the kingdom of Israel as well as the split kingdoms. They're not meant to be complete histories. They're meant to teach God's people. So 1 Samuel was written by Samuel, seems obvious. 2 Samuel was written by Ezra, which I already mentioned, because it was after Samuel died. We do not know who wrote the books of Kings and Chronicles. Ezra and Jeremiah, as I said, are our best guess. So we come to, well, let's just take a look at Samuel and Kings, because these 4 books really do go together. Just straight down chronology. 1 Samuel 1 through 7 is Samuel being the prophet the people look to. In 1 Samuel 8, he anoints King Saul as king of Israel. In 1 Samuel 16, we see David come into the story, and most of the time from there to the end of Samuel, 16 chapters, Saul spends most of that time trying to kill David. 2 Samuel, David becomes king. Not right away, but soon. And in 1 Kings 1 through 11, we have King Solomon. 1 Kings 12 to 16, after Solomon dies, Judah and Israel split. 2 southern tribes, 10 northern tribes, however you want to say it. 1 Kings 17 to 22, stories about prophets, especially it starts with Elijah. Wonderful. 1 Kings 17 for a few chapters. 17 to 19 is great. You got to go read it. Good stuff. 2 Kings 1 through 17. The separate kingdoms continue. Also stories about like Elisha. 2 Kings 18 to 25 is just the kingdom of Judah. So Samuel was a very influential prophet. His story bridges the accounts of the judges and the beginning of the kingdom. He anointed not just Saul, he also anointed David as his successor. So, that's what 1 Samuel's all about, is all of this stuff. 2 Samuel continues the story about Israel's kingdom under King David. It shows his tremendous desire to serve God, which God honored by promising his descendants would rule forever. No, his descendants aren't on the throne today, but one day a descendant of David will reign forever and ever, and that is King and our Lord, Savior, Jesus Christ. 2 Samuel shows David's humanity, his failures, and how he still turns to God. Reading Psalms with 2 Samuel is really good. The two books of the Kings, kind of the central theme is the temple's built, and it's all about the kings. 1 Kings talks about King Solomon's reign and the building of the temple. It also talks about the division of Israel after Solomon's death and subsequent decline of the Israelite nation. 2 Kings is a record of the various kings of Judah and Israel. 1 Kings is the story of the decline of the Israelites in general. 2 Kings is the story of the fall of the 10 northern tribes. What more do I have there? Not much. Chronicles. First and Second Chronicles contain many stories that overlap First and Second Samuel and First and Second Kings. First Chronicles begins with Adam, goes through Saul's reign. Where Chronicles overlaps with Samuel and Kings, it's my opinion that First Chronicles tells the story from a more idealized viewpoint than Samuel and Kings. I mean, at least from a religious perspective. Kind of tries to make things look a little better. In Second Chronicles, it continues with the reign of King Solomon and the building of God's temple, which overlaps 2 Samuel, but Then it has a record of other kings of Judah. Like First Chronicles, this book blends historical and political facts, a series of biographical type stories, each with a spiritual teaching. Timeline of the kings of Israel. I think that's pretty important. I'm not going to read the whole thing to you. You want some of these charts, you got to ask for them. I have charts everywhere. Here's a trivia question. Who was the second king of Israel? This one, I'm not an advocate of gambling, but this is a sure bet. Almost nobody's going to get this one right, unless they watch this video. Who was the second king of Israel? Did you guess David? You are absolutely wrong. Although that's what most people believe. It was Saul and then David and then Solomon. No. Go read 2 Samuel 2 through 4. You will learn that after Saul dies, his son Ishbosheth ruled Israel for 2 years. David had to defeat him. But Ishbosheth had the leader of Saul's army on his side, so it was kind of touch and go there. Good thing David had God on his side, huh? Hey, good man to have on your side. Well, not a man, but I'll take him any day. That's like, third graders picking basketball players, and you got LeBron James and a bunch of third graders. The first one picking is going to choose LeBron James, right? Yeah. If you don't know who he is pretty ultimate. I could have said Jokic or Michael Jordan, but Magic Johnson, doesn't matter. Whoever. So, where do we go? The kings of Israel. We had the combined kingdom under Saul, Ishbosheth, David, and then we have and Solomon. The divided kingdom begins with Jeroboam and Rehoboam. That started in 928 BC. Saul became king in 1028. So, basically, 100 years of the combined kingdom. That's it. That's it, people. And I bet you didn't know that. That could be a good trivia question right there. Some of the kings ruled as short as 1 month. They like to kill each other. He became king. I'll take care of that. Boom. But that was your brother. I don't care. 1 month, 3 months, 3 months, 2 years, 2 years, 1 year, 6 months. Just running through my chart. 3 years, 2 years, 2 years. Man, rough to be a king. But while you're king, you got everything, What are you willing to give up to spend 1 month or 1 year to have everything? You willing to give up your life for that? Ezra and Nehemiah. Ezra and Nehemiah follow First and Second Chronicles perfectly. They're like one unit. You should read them in that sequence. First, Second Chronicles, Ezra and Nehemiah, boom. And Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther tell the story of the period the Jews call the Restoration. So, I'll come back to the Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther thing in a little bit. This occurred during the reign, it started during the reign of Cyrus in Babylon. There were a few other kings during this period. This story begins approximately 70 years after the Israelites were taken captivity into Babylon, when Jerusalem was destroyed flat. The temple was destroyed flat. That's what the Babylonians did when they conquered a city, flat. Not a stone standing on top of another. That was common in many battles in those days. Jeremiah prophesied about those 70 years in captivity in Jeremiah 25, the first 10, 12 verses of that chapter. The Israelites, if they were paying attention, they knew that they would be in captivity for 70 years. Now, they not all went home after 70 years. Some chose to stay there. They were released in 3 different groups that the Bible records. Ezra 1 through 6 records the story of Zerubbabel leading a sizable number of Israelites back to Jerusalem to restore the temple. Unfortunately, they had a couple work stoppages and then they just plain quit. So that's found in the first 6 chapters of Ezra. Zerubbabel, by the way, was from the tribe of Judah, a descendant of David, if you would. Ezra 7 through 10 tell the story of Ezra leaving Babylon 80 years after Zerubbabel, and he restarted the rebuilding of the temple. Ezra was from the tribe of Levi, descendants of Aaron. So Esther is a record during the Israelite nation's captivity. Her story occurs during the book of Ezra, then the hiatus in their building. So between Ezra 6 and Ezra 7, that's where Esther's story occurs. And the book of Esther tells the story of Esther becoming the queen, and then she's a Jew, and she saves the Jews from destruction. She was from the tribe of Benjamin. And then after Ezra, we see Nehemiah, and he tells the story about the Israelites returning from Babylon, more Israelites coming to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem. And Nehemiah was from the tribe of Judah. Zerubbabel, Ezra, and Nehemiah were easily the 3 men most responsible for this restoration of the temple, Jerusalem, Jewish life. It's commonly believed Ezra arrived in Jerusalem about 23 years before Nehemiah. I know Zerubbabel doesn't usually get much attention because he didn't have a book of the Bible named after him, but he started it. And in this case, he started it is a good thing, not like 2 children. He started it. He started it. Give him credit. Just trying to keep things in perspective. I know this lesson's going a little longer than the last one, but major events elsewhere in the world during Old Testament times. About 2700 BC, the first Egyptian pyramid was built, we think. 2000 BC is Abraham. About 1500, Stonehenge was completed up in England, British Isles. About 1400, Egypt, that was when the Israelites went to Egypt. About 1250 BC was the Greek-Trojan War. About 1000 BC, King David's time, was the Chinese civilization really starts to develop and mature. And about the same time, the Olmec civilization in Mexico became dominant. 930, during the time of King Solomon, that was the time of Homer, the great poet, philosopher, writer of Greece. 753 BC, the founding of Rome. Just a few years later, in 718, Israel falls to Assyria to be ended. The 10 northern tribes never existed as a nation again. So about 100 years after that, 612 BC was the end of the Assyrian Empire by Babylon. 587, Babylon took Judah captive. 539, the Persians conquered Babylon. 483 was the death of Buddha. He was a real person, not just a fat image that you rub the belly. He was a real person. 480 BC, just 3 years after Buddha's death, Persia invaded Greece. Think about, that was when the story of Sparta's 300 in the Thermopylae Pass. An exaggerated story, but it sure sounds good and makes a good movie. It wasn't just 300. The Greeks sent quite a few more. But those 300 were there, and they were significant. They were the force. A year later, after the Spartan 300, the death of Confucius, 479 BC. And then 336 BC was Alexander the Great. So there's some history. And, man, I appreciate you watching this. I hope you enjoyed it a little bit. I'll try and be a little briefer in our next lesson about the books of poetry. Bye now.